What do you do for a living?
I'm a graphic designer,
Oh, okay.
web developer.
I think you told me that.
I'm sure I did last time we talked.
Yeah. Get this bag up here.
Can I buy a cup of coffee?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got coin change at this point in the week. I was looking to see that it's all zipped up. Ah, here's the stuff. Yeah.
Miss, another cup of coffee, please? Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So are you have you lived around here for a long time, or?
I've lived in this area for, I think, 4 years now.
Yeah. And where do you
Originate?
Yeah.
I was born in Philadelphia,
Yeah. Okay.
and I've lived all over the Northeast.
Yeah.
This section, I've lived in New Jersey,
Mhm.
near the Mount Laurel area,
Mhm.
and I've also lived in Maryland, near
That's where I'm from. Yeah. Where?
from Columbia.
East Columbia, Maryland. Yeah. I wasn't too far from there. When did you live there?
I lived there during the summers a lot as a kid. My aunt was there, so I went to stay with her
Okay.
just to get away.
Yeah. Yeah. I used to live in. It's probably been a while since you've been there, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. I lived in Burtonsville. You maybe didn't even know where that was.
No, I'm familiar
10
with.
or 15 miles the other way up Route 29. But if you weren't driving, then you wouldn't know.
I'm familiar with Jessup.
Yeah, I wasn't. That was like further.
Okay.
Further.
So you were closer to Baltimore?
No. Actually, you were closer to Baltimore than I was. I guess you could say I was midway between Columbia and D.C. maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Silver Spring is right nearby, and there's about 5 zip codes for Silver Spring. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks.
Oh, no problem. I needed it. I was exhausted.
I find that it doesn't help me that way.
Really?
Isn't that funny? Yeah.
It's a shame. I do like the taste of it, so.
And I just drink it for whatever reason. I think I got started on it, coffee and donuts in the mornings as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
I say kid, like teenager working at a gas station. It tasted so good probably because it was sweet. And, I don't know. But, so how old are you?
33.
Yeah, very young then. And it's Jonathan
Right.
Gold, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. I'm also getting some from a John Golden or something, some
Really?
emails that no, it's not you. Yeah. Yeah, my wife does some graphic design. I probably had said that if you mentioned it to me. You're a graphic designer. And Plymouth Meeting or East Norton, or where do you?
I live on the border of Plymouth Meeting, Norristown, and Conshohocken. It's kind of like in the triangular section.
Yeah.
Right in the center.
Yeah. What's your?
Off of Ridge.
Yeah. Like, what do you call what's your mailing address? Is it?
It's Plymouth Meeting.
Yeah. Yeah, I know it's amazing. See, in Maryland they have just the counties, and I mostly grew up in Maryland. I lived up here before.
Mm-hmm.
My dad worked for GE for many years, so we moved around. New York State for again a couple of years here and there, but DC, PA, the municipalities. I would drive home and I haven't even counted. There's probably like 10 municipalities I go to.
Right.
In fact, there's more than that probably, because I'll leave my office in Norristown. Do you know where the newspaper is?
I believe I do. Is it near the hospital?
I tell you, it's right near the river, really. Just
okay.
If you take.
I guess I don't know where.
But just like I got here probably in 6 minutes. But if we head across 202 to King of Prussia.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in Norristown Borough, and then about 1,000 feet later, I'm in West Norton, and then I'm in Bridgeport before I get over the bridge.
Right.
Then it's Upper Marion, and then I'm a couple miles from the plaza. But tell me this: how did when did you get interested in this, or when did you start becoming a true believer? If that's accurate.
Well, I wasn't a true believer for a while.
Okay.
It just, in January of 2002, President George W. Bush and Vice President Dick Cheney went to Tom Daschle's office.
Yeah, now this would say again, when was that? In 2002?
January 2002.
Okay.
They went to Tom Daschle to ask him to limit the scope of the congressional inquiry. And I thought that was odd. And then months progressed, and I saw...
Daschle, right?
Yeah, Tom Daschle.
To limit the scope of the
congressional inquiry, which is different than the 9/11 Commission.
Yeah, no, I know there was also some kind of inquiry about that time in 2002. Is that the one you're saying?
Yeah. And
yeah,
they had 28 redacted pages. Do you remember that?
You know, I'm going to look, definitely, that sounds interesting. I've only seen it referred to. Who was the senator?
You might have seen mention of it. Porter Goss and Bob Graham were the chairman of this particular
it's
commission.
Like, you remember what it's called?
The 9/11 Congressional Senate, something.
It's, right. It's not easy to remember, I know, that's why and I said, oh, okay, yeah.
I know that it was the Congressional Inquiry.
And it was something, I think they did a lot of interviewing of, who was the guy, Shelby?
Richard? No, not Richard.
No, what's his name? He's from the South. He was, I think, on the Senate Intelligence Committee at the time, and I remember him, they could have been after they had those...
I don't remember. You might have heard
Bob... Not public hearings either, I'm sure, right? Was this just intelligence committees behind closed
Honestly,
doors?
I didn't follow it as it was going. Again, months later, I started to see the family members start to lobby Washington, D.C. In order to create the so-called independent 9/11 Commission.
Yeah. But what was it about just the fact that they would ask Daschle, hey, let's keep this under wraps?
Well, it was interesting to me that here we have a massive attack on the United States of America. 3,000 people horrifically died, and the President and the Vice President of the United States don't want to investigate it, or they want to limit the investigation.
Yeah.
They were in no rush, and it was just interesting to me why they would do that.
Yeah.
I mean, if you had a loved one who was murdered, would you want the police to wait to investigate? No, of course not.
Yeah.
But again, I saw the family members, the Jersey girls, who were lobbying Washington, D.C., and they had to fight Washington, D.C. to create this independent commission. And I think it was a total of 441 days until the commission was actually created. Imagine that. 441 days waiting for the police to investigate a murder of a loved one of yours.
Yeah.
It's inconceivable.
I mean, it was, and I'm just wondering about that. I mean, because I think we were all thinking about these things. I'm trying to remember back now. I mean, was anything public about, hearings? Were these...
The congressional inquiry, I don't remember. Again, I didn't follow it to the T. I do remember when they released the report.
Okay, there was a report released.
There was a report released, and it had 28 redacted pages within it.
Okay.
And they would not release those to the public. And Senator Bob Graham, interestingly enough, wrote a book where he talked about how those redacted pages were covering up Saudi involvement.
Yeah, that's what I remember hearing.
Okay.
Yeah. And was he was part of that, was he?
Well, he was the chairman of this committee.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about the chairman of this particular committee, it was run by Porter Goss, Senator Porter Goss, and Senator Bob Graham.
Yeah.
And a couple of weeks before 9/11, Porter Goss, Bob Graham, I think it was George Tenet, flew to Pakistan to meet with Musharraf and a few other people.
Yeah.
And then on the morning of September 11th, Porter Goss, Bob Graham, and Senator John Kyle were having breakfast with Lieutenant General Mahmoud Ahmad,
Yeah.
who was the head of the Pakistani ISI.
Yeah, I remember printing some stuff out on him. I've looked at a lot of those timelines.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the...
There are several timelines.
Yeah.
The best one,
yeah, tell me which...
cooperativeresearch.org.
Yeah, I've looked at those quite a bit.
That's Paul Thompson's work.
Yeah, Paul Thompson, thank you. I did see something tonight and I said, is that the same guy? Because it's pretty amazing.
So, on the morning of September...
How do you spell his name, Mahmoud Abbas? Is it
It's M-A-H-M-O-U-D.
Yeah.
And Ahmed. It's either Ahmad or Ahmed.
Okay, probably A-H-M-E-D maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they were, you're saying they were in Pakistan.
They were in Pakistan a few weeks before.
Okay, a few weeks before, right?
Right. And on the morning of September 11th, they were meeting with him. And the Wall Street...
And they were here, right, in D.C.?
They were in D.C., and so was he. And the Wall Street Journal reported, I think it was in October of 2001, that Lieutenant General Mahmoud Ahmad ordered Omar Sheikh to wire transfer $100,000 to Mohammed Atta. And I thought that it was interesting that these senators who were in charge of this congressional inquiry had a major conflict of interest investigating this. Because what were they doing with this person? And then a month later, when the Wall Street Journal reported this, Musharraf sacked Lieutenant General Mahmoud Ahmad, and then I think it was in January.
Okay, so he did. He sacked him.
He sacked him once it was found out that he had wire transferred the $100,000.
Right, so that was, confirmed apparently.
Yeah. In fact, I believe it was one of the members of Parliament, Michael Meacher, wrote an article in 2003 called "The Pakistan Connection," where he specifically cited this. And I've had some correspondence with him.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And he showed
what is that guy's name?
Michael Meacher, M-E-A-C-H-E-R.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Musharraf, so he...
Right, so he sacked him, and then in early 2002, I forget whether it was January or February, Daniel Pearl was murdered, and the prime suspect of the murder was Omar Sheikh. And I think Daniel Pearl's wife believes that he was murdered because he was investigating that very wire transfer and the Pakistan's connection to 9/11.
Yeah, is that Sheikh with...
Omar Sheikh, S-H-E-I-K-H.
Yeah.
So that's a congressional inquiry. And that was a major conflict of interest. They had nowhere... They shouldn't have been anywhere near that commission.
And, that joint... I think they were calling it the joint inquiry when I've seen footnotes.
Right, exactly, the joint inquiry.
And I think I was in... I don't know if I was in the timelines or the 9/11 report,
I know it's on Paul's site, this meeting. And it's all mainstream sources. I love Paul's work.
Yeah, boy, he really does a hell of a job, doesn't he? But he does it all by himself?
No, he originally did.
Yeah.
And now I think he has a staff.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny, they were actually down for a couple of days this week. And it's amazing when you take things for granted until you lose them. I was looking for information, and I usually go there, and it wasn't there.
Yeah, I haven't been on it. I know I printed out some stuff and stapled it together. And I did some writing on the whole Able Danger thing. And he had, quite a bit on that, too, which was nice.
Yeah.
Had 20
absolutely.
20 or so pages I printed out and stapled in.
I actually met Lieutenant Schaefer recently.
Did you?
Nice
I think you told me this.
I went to a town hall meeting.
Rep Weldon? Yeah.
Rep Weldon.
In Berwyn?
Yeah, in the YMCA.
And what, I remember reading, you sent me something and I started to read it.
I sent you, I think, a transcript of...
Yeah, I mean, I'll look at this stuff more closely now, of course. What did you think? I mean, what did you ask?
Well,
I think you had it recorded, did you?
I had it recorded.
Yeah.
And it's on my website.
Yeah.
I was there with a man by the name of Dave Schlesinger, who was very involved in researching the anthrax attacks that took place after 9/11.
Yeah.
And Dave,
In the streets.
yeah, you know that was American-made, the virus, the Ames strain.
I know it was talked about that it was, but
I believe the White House was
a
on
lot of
Cipro
doubts.
on September 11th. They decided to go on Cipro, and Judicial Watch is currently suing them, I believe, to get them to respond to their questions in regards to the Cipro.
Yeah, and then who was taking Cipro?
The president, the White House.
Okay.
They started taking it, I believe it was either September 11th or September 12th.
HIPAA rules. You can't find out, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So anyway, Dave Schlesinger
Yeah.
was involved in he's involved in the anthrax attacks. He's also
So he's involved. In other words, he's looking into it.
he's looking into it. He's researching it. He's also big on the idea that the World Trade Center was controlled demolition.
Yeah, I have heard that. I think that I don't know if it was Griffin who first told me that. Or...
It may very well have been Griffin, but within the last 6 months or so, a professor, a physics professor, has come out of BYU stating that he thinks he has a hypothesis that the buildings could not have come down as it was explained, and the only possible solution would have been controlled demolition in some form. And I just read some correspondence that he posted on the web the other day. He was receiving emails from structural engineers who agreed with him. And, I mean, he got some hate mail, too.
Yeah, but I'd be very interested in who, you know, if you get enough people backing you up, it seems to me some of these things that you believe are true, and may well be true, could get some momentum. But I think, you know, it just...
For me, it's very hard. I'm not a metallurgist. I'm not a structural engineer.
No, you have to go to the experts.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Anybody, yeah, like I would, because I'm no expert.
I mean, it certainly looks like it. It came down so fast.
Well, a lot of things can look like something.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. I'm an untrained guy, and
yeah.
It took me a long time to accept that maybe it was.
They weren't granite buildings. I mean, you know, like the old style.
Right.
Like the Woolworths building that, who knows, something that was built long ago. I don't know if the same thing would have happened or not. I mean,
Well, again,
yeah.
I don't talk about it. I refer people to Professor Jones, the BYU professor, to hear what he has to say.
And what's his first name?
Stephen.
He teaches at BYU, you say?
Yes, he's a physics professor. I believe he's been teaching there for 20 years.
Pretty young, right?
Mm-hmm. So Dave Schlesinger wrote down a question that had to do with, I think it was something in regards to if firemen come forward stating that there were explosions heard that day and so forth, would you look into that? Because supposedly Representative Weldon is big on firemen.
Oh yeah, he is absolutely. He used to be a firefighter.
Right.
And he lost he always tells people everywhere he goes practically that, you know, the chief dude in New York died and he was a friend of his.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And I think he went to some of the firehouses in New York City to talk to the people, to console the people.
Yeah.
He came across as a very sincere individual.
Yeah, that's how, you know, I've been covering him for more than 4.5 years or something.
Right.
And I've never, you know, said to myself, you know, I think he's full of crap.
Right.
He always seems, and sometimes you can speculate about things. We all do, and what if, and, you know, but I don't see him, yeah, I do see him as pretty straightforward.
When he had come out, I think it was at a time when the 9/11 truth movement was gaining momentum. And it was interesting that he had come out, and a lot of the things he was saying was pointing towards the Clinton administration.
Yeah, that's a familiar theme with this as well.
And it was very interesting to me because it was taking the focus away from Bush and putting it towards Clinton. And obviously, everybody within the movement was suspect of that. But it turns out, I mean, the whole story behind Able Danger is, you know, for all intents and purposes, true. So there's obviously something behind it. And I did think he was sincere. I had written down 2 questions to be asked. Why did Bush asked Tom Daschle to limit the scope of the.
Okay, you asked him that?
I asked him that.
Okay.
I had written it down on a card, and somebody had read it. And I also asked him, why did the 9/11 family members have to fight for the creation of the commission?
Yeah.
And I think he gave me an answer. Well, both administrations, the Clinton administration and the Bush administration, had got together and decided that they didn't want all of the truth to be known because some people might be held accountable.
Yeah, yes. Right. Oh, no, I'm fine, thank you.
No, I'm good, thank you. And at the time I said I agree with you completely, because to me, the Clinton administration is just as evil or corrupt as the Bush administration. So I said I completely agree with you, however, so forth.
I think that helps his credibility too. You know, things are so divisive, you know, with the liberals, the conservatives.
I hate labels. Go ahead.
And Weldon wasn't making any friends in the Bush administration either by pushing this Able Danger thing. I just came to the conclusion that
didn't you write?
After going through all this, I was thinking, is there some deep dark secret I'm going to find out at the end? Is there going to be,
right,
some really cool thing that people actually care about? Because I think most people think, whatever. It's about inside the Beltway story.
Right.
And I just get the sense that, and it's been said many times when you talk to people who are in Washington circles, either as experts that get on talking head shows or congressmen, whoever. When you screw up, you don't want to.
You don't want it publicized.
I think it's human nature. It's like we all can remember times in our lives and say, "Look, I'm trying to put it behind me. Don't rake me over the coals again." 10 years later now for something we should have done.
Right.
We should have paid more attention to this data mining and these terrorists that were getting linked. And when such and such a general retired and said, "I didn't want anything to do with it," we should have been there.
However,
so it'll embarrass them, in other words.
Right.
And that it's not some deep dark secret. Although I'm sure there's deep dark secrets. I mean, I don't know much. I mean,
if incompetence was the reason, their actions after 9/11 make them appear more guilty than their actions prior to 9/11. To me, they used it. They used it from day one. I believe it was Donald Rumsfeld who was writing down, "Sweep it all up," or Saddam Hussein, "Sweep it up," talking to his subordinates. And I think one of them, actually was released recently, one of the notes from one of the staffers of that particular meeting said that the case for Saddam was
prior
weak.
to going to, in other words, had we gone into Afghanistan yet?
This was on September 11th.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, oh yeah. Rumsfeld was making the case, or asking to make the case, for Iraq on September 11th.
But you don't think he really believed that maybe Iraq could be involved?
Did he believe Iraq was involved? Well, I think it's interesting that, considering that we had absolutely no warnings, according to them, that George Tenet, before the second plane hit, was having breakfast, and he said, after he was told that the first plane hit, he said, "This has Osama bin Laden's fingerprints all over it."
I remember reading that too.
And so at that point, without any warnings yet, they had an idea that it was Osama bin Laden.
Yeah.
So I think after they decided that it was Osama bin Laden, they also decided that it was going to be Saddam Hussein. But to the American people, Osama bin Laden was in Afghanistan, so of course we had to take care of that first.
And I've got a book to recommend to you if you haven't seen it yet. I think it's, in many ways, the most even-handed thing I've seen anybody write. There's a guy named Richard Miniter. He's been a reporter for many years. I think he lived in Belgium and maybe half the year here or something. His book's called, he's got several books. It's called Disinformation, 22 Media Myths that harm the war on terror or whatever.
Mhm.
But and you know, it sounds like some kind of let's say conservative hack thing.
Mhm.
But he really he calls what's fascinating and extraordinary, like with Thompson, with this all the stuff he does. Richard Miniter has taken newspaper reports and what people said in hearings and personal interviews he's had, and I mean he's of course got newspapers and magazines from all over the world, you know, being left, like as he sometimes points out, you know, according to Le Monde, you know, the left of center, you know, French paper,
Right.
they even say that, okay, look at all the, and they're, and you can look at, say, 3 pages of his book and get what I'm talking about. He points to all these connections or links, you know, meetings, money, training, and there's another category, you know, between Iraqi intelligence and Al-Qaeda people. And usually, and I've had other people tell me this as well, Lori Milroy, which she sometimes gets, you know, painted as being kind of kooky, because she was always on, she said, Iraq, you know, they always just prosecute a couple people, but you got to look at the state sponsors. And she was always big on pointing to Iraq, which people I know became suspect of this view. I was trying to say. Oh, and Miniature, again, he points to all these different things that have appeared in newspapers, magazines, hearings, Colin Powell.
Whose chief of staff said he took part in.
You know, he was, you know, you remember him at the UN, I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah,
Where he
oh
was,
yeah.
And, you know, everybody I think was waiting for, okay, give us something really good, you know. But at this point, I think I'm convinced, and, you know, you always have to, you know, evaluate this stuff. It's tough to say, okay, this is absolutely true, but there are so many links, and it's so shadowy. I mean, we may never know, but why is it, I mean, if these 20 things that are listed, these connections and relationships, you probably heard about the, one of the great ones, I think, unless you think people are lying about it. A couple of sources, and one guy was on Frontline, I guess back in 2002. I don't know if you watched that. Yeah, on PBS.
I probably may have. Go ahead.
I've always liked that show a lot. And several people have corroborated this, that in a place called Salman's Tack, south of Baghdad, you know, it's a training compound. When I say training, they had out in the desert there, and the satellite view confirmed the fact that there was like a 707 jet, I think, out there.
Okay. Oh,
covered
under the... Oh, right, go ahead.
Not buried now. This thing was being used, supposedly, according to several reports I've read, separate reports, to train terrorists. And, you know, for people to say, oh, you know, Saddam Hussein would never do that. I mean, you know.
There's no question that Saddam Hussein was a bastard.
I'm not saying to you that somebody said, oh, okay, let's sign this agreement, you and me,
well,
and we're going to attack the Trade Center, but, you know.
Well, okay, Saddam Hussein was a bastard, but he was our friend first.
Well, I know he was, yeah, when we were fighting the Iranians,
he was our good buddy.
You know how that is.
Right,
yeah.
And we gave him a lot of the weapons that he had. I think there was a
story. We helped him in any way we could back in the 80s when he was fighting Iran.
The interesting thing, Ray McGovern. Are you familiar?
And he's gone, you know. Right. Iran's getting out of handy, and it could be real big handy, right?
Well, are you familiar with Ray McGovern?
I know the name.
Ray McGovern is an ex-CIA analyst. He used to write the presidential daily briefings. He worked for the CIA for 27 years. And he made an interesting point. I think it was in July of 2001, Colin Powell was giving some kind of presentation where he said that Saddam Hussein basically was not a threat at all, that he wasn't reconstituting his weapons and so forth. And yet, I think it was 6 weeks after 9/11, suddenly Saddam Hussein now has weapons of mass destruction.
Well, see, it depends on who you talk to.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think Powell was, of course, as you must know, not a fan of going to a war in Iraq.
He was a yes man. He certainly was complicit with the sale
and there's
of
an
the war.
excellent frontline show on that too. I think I finally understood why he almost felt like he had to do that, because he knew they were going to war, and you know there were so many people in the Pentagon. it was like, you know, and it's a little bit, it's almost a little bit subtle, this whole point that he was afraid to just walk out and leave, say, you know, because of his relationship to the, you know, the Pentagon, the, you know, past Joint Chiefs, and that he basically kind of had to, felt like he had to stick in there with it, and, you know, be a team player.
Well, think about Treasury Secretary, ex-Treasury Secretary Paul O'Neill. He said that 10 days after the inauguration, there was a cabinet meeting, and within this cabinet meeting, supposedly it was all about finding a way to invade Iraq.
And this was after 9/11, right?
No. This is January 2001,
okay.
I believe.
Well, now, see, that, to me, you know, I'll put my cards on the table. I've always been somebody who felt like we were going to go back and finish that business that went unfinished. So, see, to me, this is not some great suspicious
But Saddam
thing.
wasn't, I mean, he wasn't a threat to us. Most certainly he was not a threat to us. He had no weapons that could reach the United States soil.
Yeah, but that's the theory that has been played on, you know. And
absolutely, that's what they did.
Who's to say? See, after 9/11, the point has been made by Bush. Well, you know what? If I'm unsure about the threat, I'm going to err on the side of that he could be a threat.
But you can invade any country under that premise.
Yeah, you could.
And there are countries that are more dangerous now than Saddam Hussein ever was, and yet, you know.
Yeah.
But back to Paul O'Neill, in this cabinet meeting, he was stating that it was all about finding a way to do it. The president saying, "Go find me a way to do this." And
he really does say that in his book.
He says that.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was very interesting, especially. Okay, let me ask you a question.
I have to look into that because that's the way you're putting that. I mean, that should have been pretty explosive stuff. I remember when
it was at the time, and then they tried to. He's trying to sell a book. You know, that's what the Fox News of the world were saying.
Yeah.
But I forget what I was going to say. Okay. Let me ask you a question. If the president of the United States has a plan to invade Iraq, has a plan to invade Afghanistan, and the only way that they'll be able to do something like that is if something like 9/11 takes place, and then
I would argue that.
And then 9/11.
We could have. If you work on the American public long enough, I think he probably.
On 9/10/2001, if the president told us we were suddenly going to invade Afghanistan and Iraq, what would you think?
But Afghanistan, I would have said, well, what's there? You know, because I didn't know.
Right.
You know, Iraq has a track record that I'm
well
aware of. Yeah.
Absolutely.
You're somebody who's, you know, Iraq attacked Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Israel, Iran. I mean, obviously this guy is. To me, he makes me very nervous.
In July of 2001, somebody from Pakistan, I think it was the foreign secretary, was told that the United States is planning on invading Afghanistan by October of 2001. This was 2 months before 9/11.
Okay. Who was that? Do you remember that one?
I can send you the link. I forget his name off the top of my head. It's so hard to remember names.
Yeah.
But back to the question, if 9/11 takes place, allowing them to do these invasions, doesn't that automatically make the president a suspect? If he wanted to do something, couldn't do something unless something happened, then that something happens, and then they use it to do the dirty deed, doesn't that make them a suspect?
Not necessarily, and I'll tell you why. You know, the trade tower had been attacked before. As I was watching on 9/11, I'm almost thinking, you know, boy, I guess we shouldn't be terribly surprised. I mean, it was pretty fantastic.
Well, and to put that into context, they had no idea that this was going to take place. Meanwhile, the president received several warnings. I mean, the summer prior to 9/11,
daily brief, you mean that?
Well, that, and they were suffering, supposedly intelligence analysts were suffering from warning fatigue. And I think it's interesting that they didn't do anything. They're getting all these warnings and nothing was done. And yet, the president got the August 6th PDB, which said, I think, 70 bin Laden-related cases were being investigated within the United States, that he had plans to hijack or attack a plane, to hijack, I forget what the exact wording was, but
yeah.
so again, they went from no warnings to no idea that a plane would be used in that way to, so on and so forth. They go down the line. Ari Fleischer on the morning, I think it was on September 11th, said there were no warnings.
Yeah. See, I think you'll always find, I don't know.
But anyway, so why isn't he
here.
a suspect? Thank you.
Yeah.
Why isn't he a suspect?
In creating or orchestrating the 9/11 attack.
Orchestrating, facilitating.
Yeah. See, to me, that's too fantastic for my mind. I mean,
well, see, that's
of course,
the thing. That's the first obstacle.
But that's not to say you could never bring the evidence. It could be that people you have to whittle away and say, well, look, now you believe me 2 years later because I've shown you all this. But
that's the first obstacle we face within the 9/11 truth movement is getting people to put down that wall that says our government would never do something like that. Yet this is
kill thousands of Americans.
That argument no longer works because this administration was willing to kill upwards of 250,000 Iraqi civilians. There was a study released recently that stated...
How many Iraqis?
250,000.
Yeah, that sounds way high.
It's way high according...
Then again, I know this killing goes on...
Yeah, but this was based on the Lancet study. Do you remember the Lancet study?
Well, that's another reason why I would refer you to Mr. Miniter's book. And he's also bought, first I bought the CDs, so when I was taking a trip, I could listen to the 7 CD set. Then some of this stuff is so great, it's so good and so interesting. It was just knocking my socks off. And I was saying, I got to get a book so I can look at this, so I can refer.
So anyway, this is
100,000 is what was said in the...
Whatever the number is, they were willing to go kill these people. And they are people. People here don't realize that Iraqis, Iranians, Israelis, whoever, are people who have families, who have children, who have jobs, who have lives. And they were more than willing to kill all of these people. So to say that they wouldn't be willing to kill 3,000 at this point in the game is absurd to me.
Being Americans, though, I mean, to me that's the...
Well,
it's one thing to declare war and say, okay, we're warning you, you got to do this, that, and, you dance, we danced with
back in the 70s.
For years and years. Finally said, okay, we're coming after you.
Back in the 70s, I don't know if you saw or not, but Donald Rumsfeld, I think he was the defense secretary back then, or either the White House chief of staff.
Yeah, he was in the Ford administration.
He was in the Ford administration.
Yeah, he might have been Pentagon, I forget.
He was selling the idea back in the 70s that Russia was getting all of these weapons together, that we had to become prepared for this. And all of the intelligence analysts back then said that wasn't true, that Russia was on the verge of bankruptcy, that they couldn't come up with the weapons and so forth.
I thought they had tons of stuff. I mean, if you...
Well, they did, but he said they were making more.
Well, I'll tell you that.
He was He was making the exact same argument back in the 70s that he was making in 2001, 2002.
Yeah, I don't know if we had, spies there that could verify that, or whether that... See, that's the thing. This whole intelligence thing, it's like somebody could say, well, I think this is what's going on, and I'm really concerned about it. Somebody else might tell you, well, I really don't think anything's going on. So it depends on who you're choosing to believe.
Well, again, this is the same group of people who were behind Iran-Contra. These are the same people who were involved with the BCCI scandal that cost the American taxpayer, I think, $1 trillion. $1 trillion. And yet, but they're not willing to do something as horrific as 9/11.
Well, I mean, I'm certainly willing to believe that we go to war and we know we're going to kill people.
But most wars...
But not Americans.
Most wars that America have you ever heard of Operation Northwoods?
Yeah, you sent me that.
Right. This was a plan from the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Right.
Lemnitzer, JFK's cabinet, I believe he was Defense Secretary at the time, got together with the Joint Chiefs to come up with this idea to kill Americans and blame it on Cuba so that we could invade Cuba.
Yeah.
So to say that they're not capable of coming up with an idea like that...
Well, yeah, I mean, anybody could come up with ideas.
Well, but the good thing was JFK said no.
Yeah.
And as a result, the Bay of Pigs took place and so forth. But What if Bush said yes?
Yeah, what
It's
if,
possible.
what if,
He's a human
but-
being. See, people
yeah.
think that he's not capable of such things as
But why
greed.
would you, see, I just don't see that, and this is where I think a lot of people, there's a disconnect with me and other people.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking, why would it be so difficult if 9/11 never occurred,
To convince the American people.
that we needed to go back into Iraq?
Because
I
preemptive
think
strike
that was,
is unheard of. Preemptively going into another country to invade just for the sake of invading.
wait a minute, but what about the, the UN, the peace treaty that was agreed
1412.
to after the war, that, okay, you surrender, we beat you,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to now document all these chemical and biological,
Which
whatever
he
kind of weapons
supposedly
you have.
didn't do.
You have to document, you destroy it, and the UN has to watch you and document it.
Mm-hmm.
This was never done, so it seems to me this is what's created all this suspicion. And for years, they sent the inspectors in, and they get screwed around or
Saddam
told to
Hussein
go
had,
look here and there, and
Saddam Hussein had absolutely nothing to do with 9/11. Absolutely nothing. So they used 9/11 as a license and a pretext to invade Iraq.
well, but
I mean, they sent
if somebody said to
15,000.
you, okay, and I've also made this point. You could almost click in the tail on the donkey, put the Mideast map, and go, okay, yeah, there's a country. Well, we could go to war with them. We have, lots of reasons, but the history we have with Iraq for a decade, and we went to war against them, and they were supposed to destroy the weapons and show everyone that it's destroyed, and basically, and
But he had nothing to do with 9/11.
Yeah, well, forget that, because like I say, I still think you could have made, you could still have had people in the intelligence community, I suppose, that say, well, look, we're concerned, we think that Saddam's got, nuclear program, which people say he did, not that he had.
But it's especially
missiles.
convenient when you have an administration who wants to go to war with Saddam Hussein. They're looking for this intelligence.
Yeah.
I mean, Cheney went to
know.
the CIA
I
9 times.
I would agree with you that if you have this inclination to do it, you're probably going to see
You're going to cherry pick what you want. And that's exactly what they did. Colin Powell, Chief of Staff, Lawrence Wilkerson, I believe is his name, said that he took part in a hoax on the American people. This was a hoax. This is an insider. This is.
What you mean.
There's so much information out there that shows that, the Downing Street memos show that they fixed the facts around the policy. That's proof. That's proof right there, concrete proof, and that nothing came of it. The mainstream media ignored it. They ignored it for a long time until Representative John Conyers, fought for hearings to have that investigated. Eventually, he had his own hearings in the basement of the House. They wouldn't give him big room; they had to give him the basement.
When was that now?
I think it was middle last year.
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. That's when they said, oh, by the way, we're spying on this group in Palm Beach. Is that the one you're talking about?
I don't remember.
Maybe it was another one.
That might have been the NSA.
No, that's the NSA, yeah.
Which he also is chairman. He's an interesting person, Representative Conyers.
I'm just, this whole obsession with, and there's a fire chief, now the president, the whole fire department, Bill Genoway, sat on one of these committees, committee into looking into the weapons of mass destruction, that 2 or 3 years before 9/11. So there was this drumbeat, I think, where, we're concerned, we're afraid. The stuff is there. Saddam used it during the war against Iran. Everybody knows that. The way the Kurds were, practically annihilated. There seems to be ample evidence that occurred. You've seen the pictures of Halabja and heard the stories maybe about dropping the...
You're making the case for the Iraq War.
Yeah.
And that's fine and good. I can send you 1,000 pieces of information that would show you why we should have never gone into Iraq. The United Nations Charter, which was formed after Nazis, the Nuremberg Charter, which said you cannot preemptively invade another country. And again, 9/11 is the catalyst for everything. You cannot have. The President of the United States
That's what
has
people
told
have
us.
a problem with.
But the President of the United States told us that we're there because of 9/11. He told us that. We're fighting them over there so we don't have to fight them here.
Yeah, that was actually, you're right. In the beginning, that seemed to be, you know, this connection made. And somehow it vanished, and then it was like, well, you know, then you started pointing out that, you know, our planes were getting shot at for a decade in the no-fly zone.
You know that
and by the way, if we brought democracy to that part of the world, you know, things would probably be better for us. There seemed to be so many reasons, but I think people were skeptical.
Did you hear the news about what Bush wanted to do with a plane? He came up with the idea to paint a plane in UN colors, fly it over Iraq in order to coerce Saddam into firing upon him to start the war.
Well, they were firing on our planes, and the British planes, and even the French.
But
when they were involved, you know, the French were involved.
A UN plane being shot down would cause some commotion. I don't know what his logic was.
I think if one of our planes was shot down, it would have caused some commotion.
I don't know why they thought of it, but it was just showing how badly they wanted to go to war with Saddam. But anyway, let's go back to 9/11.
All right. Well, what do you say? You know, if I showed you this book, the miniature, you know, which actually I was getting some email on, and I said, who is this guy? You know, and but you know, you can get it in the bookstore. He's apparently fairly mainstream. Doesn't seem to have an agenda. And in fact,
I hate that word, agenda.
Yeah, I know. That's another one of his catchphrases. Another thing he talks about is, you know, he talks about a lot of different things. He says profiling people. He says that wouldn't work. He said, you know, are you just going to profile Middle Eastern men? What about, you know, people that don't look Middle Eastern that are going to be the future terrorists maybe? How are you? He convinced me with a lot of you know, evidence that he was presenting that was, you know, kind of a dead end. And it was just fascinating. But anyway, back to 9/11.
Back to 9/11. Let's look at the creation of the 9/11 so-called Independent 9/11 Commission. Miss, I'll take another cup of coffee, please. They originally wanted to get Henry Kissinger to head the commission, and we all know Henry Kissinger has ties to all kinds of businesses and corporate elite. When the families questioned Kissinger on his finances and his business dealings, which coincidentally ran into the Saudi world, he stepped down because he didn't want to release his records.
His financial holdings. Yeah, thanks.
Oh.
Right. Seeing a lot of financial interest in the Middle East, Saudis.
So that was number one conflict of interest. Then they appoint Thomas Keane, who is chairman of the board, he's on the board of Hess, I believe, Hess Oil.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Which is a conflict of interest in itself. Then they get Vice Chairman Lee Hamilton.
And what's his relationship to Hess again now?
He's on the board.
Okay.
Lee Hamilton was the head of the Iran-Contra investigation. And if you remember correctly, Lee Hamilton did not want to assign blame to anybody because it would be bad for the country. So
in Iran-Contra?
Yeah, in Iran-Contra. And Lee Hamilton, of course they're going to get Lee Hamilton to be the vice chair because he's good at covering up things. But on top of that, I mean, there were other conflicts of interest. But
I know Griffin points out that, which is, you know, a part of his book that I found was interesting because I thought, I didn't know that. And I, you know, believe what he's saying, that, you know, the head staff lawyer for, the guy's name, I just sort of coming out tonight. No, but the top staff, the guy
Philip Zelikow,
yes,
the executive director.
Right.
It's my favorite topic.
You know, the fact that he was somebody tied in with
the Bush
administration. So that's legitimate. You're right, that's conflict. It's legit as hell.
This is a man who was, I think he was part of the first Bush administration.
I think he was also involved, yeah.
He wrote a book with Condoleezza Rice.
Right.
He was part of the Bush transition team.
Yeah.
He wrote the Iraq War strategies.
What else do you need, right? I mean, it's just
The family members came forward and said, we want him to resign.
Mm-hmm.
And they were denied that. And this is a man who was in charge of the investigation. The commissioners themselves were window dressing. The actual work was done by the staff.
Right.
And the staff was controlled by Philip Zelikow, a member of the Bush administration. And now he's working underneath Condoleezza Rice at the Department of State.
Yeah.
So these people should never have. The family members wanted to get scholars. They didn't want anybody in the Beltway to investigate this. They wanted an independent investigation, and they did not get it.
They're truly independent. If
Truly,
you can do such a thing, but you know you could do better.
You can do better than what they did.
And
the fact that there are so many omissions in the report, there are so many lies within the report, shows that it was not, by any stretch of the imagination, a bipartisan commission. I'll give you a for instance. Sibel Edmonds. You familiar with her?
Yeah. Where do I know that name?
Sibel Edmonds was an FBI translator
Right.
who was hired not long after 9/11 to translate documents in Turkish, I believe.
She with a C or an S? Is it Sybil?
Sibel, S-I-B-E-L.
That's right.
Edmonds. Anyway, she came across some documentation, some very interesting documentation. I don't remember everything off the top of my head, but Senator Patrick Leahy, Senator Chuck Grassley, found that she was legitimate. Her complaints were legitimate. The Inspector General,
interview in that 60 Minutes.
The Inspector General said that she was fired wrongly. The reasons that she was fired.
The FBI, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
I forget his name off the top of my head. But anyway, Sibel Edmonds came across some interesting information. Showed the financing, I believe, behind 9/11. I mean, this is all conjecture. I don't know. I just remember she once said that once you start to think of it like an international drug ring, it all starts to make sense. This is a woman who said that...
And she was discovering this stuff when she worked for the FBI.
When she worked, she tried to report it. She was blocked. They offered her a promotion, I believe, to keep quiet. And then eventually they fired her. And the Inspector General said that she was wrongly fired. She has since tried to come out. She spoke with the 9/11 Commission for 3 hours. And the best they could do was give her a footnote in the back of the book. They didn't discuss anything that she talked about. And John Ashcroft came forward, gagged her, gagged Congress, talking about her case. I think she describes herself as the most gagged person in American history.
Yeah, I don't recall that, what you're saying about that. I remember her making the point that she was catching people translating stuff, poorly, and I'm trying to figure out what the
basically the story was that they were asking her to slow down on her work so that they could ask for more money in the budget. I believe that's what the story was.
I mean, I'm not doubting. I don't remember everything. I just remember, at least the 60 Minutes story, saying that she was catching people that really, their translations were not very good, and in fact they were not.
Well, they were mistranslating.
You're right, right.
And the
woman, they weren't particularly sympathetic to America, and there was some problems.
One of the individuals, Melik Can Dickerson, who was mistranslating these documents. M-E-L-E-K Can, C-A-N, Dickerson. Melik Can, Can, C-A-N, and then Dickerson. She was, sorry?
Dickerson is a last name? Or
yes, Dickerson. Melik Can Dickerson. Anyway, she found that she was mistranslating documents, putting documents aside that should be translated, and it turned out that she had ties to the American Turkish Council, who allegedly was paying bribes to Speaker of the House, Dennis Hastert.
American Turkish Council?
The American Turkish Council.
And they were paying Hastert?
Hastert.
For what now?
I honestly, I don't remember off the top of my head. I can show you the articles. She was interviewed by Amy Goodman about this. Vanity Fair in September 2005 came out with an article about Sibel.
Okay.
which talked about this. They were actually the ones who broke this story about Dennis Hastert. Sybil can't tell you anything, but people can look into her story.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
But there were a couple of quotes that Sybil said that need to be printed. She said, once this issue gets to be investigated, you're going to be seeing certain American people standing trial and being prosecuted criminally for September 11th attacks. She recognized no less than 10 American names that were involved in the attacks.
All right, indirectly, directly, or?
I don't know because she can't talk.
She really can't.
She can't.
She said that much, but she can't give details? Or?
That's all she said. She can't give details. And
yeah.
That to
10
me,
people implicated in the 9/11 attack.
Right. If you look at her history, she's obviously legitimate.
Yeah.
The fact that the 9/11 Commission gave her a footnote speaks volumes.
Well, yeah, this sounds very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now, so I think she's trying to somehow come out. I saw that she was ready.
Vanity Fair.
Vanity Fair, September 2005. I can send you the article.
All right.
I have it.
Yeah.
But that's just one.
Yeah.
The war games that were taking place on September 11th.
Vanity Fair.
Sorry.
Yeah.
The war games that were taking place on September 11th were not mentioned. They were given another footnote in the back of the book. Supposedly there were upwards of 6 military exercises taking place that day. One of them, or I believe 2 of them, had to do with hijackings in particular. These were involving NORAD, and they were using what's called live fly exercises, which means they were using real aircraft to train with. This was reported, I think it was the Toronto Star. There were several other outlets, but Major Don Arias, who works at NORAD, was the one who confirmed that the exercises that were taking place that day and the type of exercises that were taking place that day. Because he lost his brother in the South Tower. He was watching the plane come in. They weren't warning anybody to get out of the building. He had to call his brother on a landline to tell him to get the hell out of the building because they weren't doing it.
I wonder, and how far was the plane away from the towers when he, was that something
that's not in the 9/11 Commission report?
Yeah.
There are many things not in the 9/11 Commission report.
And it seems to me, I mean, not that I'm contesting that one at all, but
well, Ralph Eberhart, General Ralph Eberhart, was testifying before the 9/11 Commission.
Yeah.
They brought up the war games, and they asked him, did they impede the procedures, the procedures for dealing with hijackings and so forth? And he said, no, it actually made us switch over a lot quicker into emergency, or whatever the hell he said. It made us more able to deal with the emergency. And the fact of the matter is, they still didn't deal with it, so that can't be true. All 4 planes, well, 3 of the planes hit their targets. Anyway, so it received a footnote in the back.
Yeah.
These are questions that we as Americans deserve answers to. That we deserve these answers because, as I said, 9/11 was the catalyst for everything. The Patriot Act, both of the wars, the NSA wiretapping, everything that's taking place today is happening as a result of 9/11.
Yeah.
So don't you think it makes sense for us to really look at it, to see what the hell happened? So number 1, it doesn't happen again. And number 2, there needs to be accountability at all levels. There really needs to be accountability.
I think people would generally agree with that, with what you just said.
Okay. But why?
And that's like you say,
but
okay,
the media
let's
doesn't
get a
cover
commission
it.
together, and they, like you say, Bush doesn't make it easy, and then finally it's going to happen. But who chooses who they're going to put on that thing?
I don't know. What about
And it's too late to talk about that now. But what?
in regards to the responses on 9/11? We were given 3 timelines regarding how quickly a plane took off to intercept and so forth. And Senator Mark Dayton came forward and said that NORAD lied to the American people. They lied to the 9/11 Commission. Why would he do that? Am I making this up? Am I crazy? No.
Well, either he's right, they did lie.
Well, they did.
They're covering themselves because they fucked up big time.
There are things that took place on 9/11 that could.
Or is he wrong that somehow, information he has gives him this
All he did was
conclusion?
read the 9/11 report and look at sources, I believe, like cooperative research, and say, well, wait a second, this doesn't make sense. This doesn't coincide with what they're telling us.
And he still maintains that to this day.
Actually, I don't know. I haven't heard him talk about it.
What's his first name? Is it Mark Dayton?
Senator Mark Dayton.
I have seen him. I watch, those hearings are used to do quite a bit.
The 9/11 Commission was a sham. Senator Max Cleland, who was on the commission, quit because he said he didn't want to take part in a sham against the American people. He said, this is a sham, what's taking place. And my question to you is...
Because of the people they were putting on it, in other words.
Well, they were limiting the investigation. They weren't looking at the right things, and he got mad and resigned from the commission.
Yeah.
He didn't want to take part in it, and I don't blame him. All those people that lost their lives that day deserve better than what they got.
Has he ever written? He's probably written some stuff on it. No?
I don't remember. I don't think so. There were some articles that were written while he was on the commission that spoke of him, but I don't think he came out. It's interesting how a lot of people have been quiet about 9/11. I mean, the obvious cover-ups that are taking place, people are quiet. The mainstream media focuses more on the fringe of the movement than they do the meat and potatoes of the movement.
I think if some of us thought, we could somehow, break the story that this was, this cover-up, we would do it. How do we do it? Because, like I say, I could talk to you, for days and months, and you're saying, well, look here, look there, and it gets a little overwhelming.
Absolutely.
To try to get
it was overwhelming for all of us.
Yeah.
All of us who were involved in the 9/11 Truth Movement at one point made a decision to look into this. And when we did, we just spent countless hours reading and reading and reading, looking for things, corresponding with people who may have been involved, or like my correspondence with Michael Meacher. I've spoken with someone who wrote a report that spoke specifically of planes being hijacked from Al-Qaeda and being flown into buildings. I spoke to the author of that report, which came out before 9/11. I think it was written in '99. I can send it to you.
When was the Truth Movement? When did? Were you in on it in the beginning?
No, not at all. The funny thing is, on the day of 9/11, the first question I had after the Pentagon was hit, I was like, where the hell is our military? Where is our military? And Payne Stewart, do you remember Payne Stewart?
That's the name I know.
The golfer. 1999, his plane, there was nobody answering the radio and so forth, so they sent a plane up to take a look to see what was happening. Eventually, by the time they were done, they had 6 planes on this one. Yet on 9/11, there were none.
Yeah, I think, as I recall, they said, well, they were on maneuvers, they were on war games, whatever.
Exactly, war games. I'd like to know about those war games. I'd like to know what...
I seem to buy more into the sort of incompetent part of it, that somehow, and that isn't, comforting either, any more than a conspiracy not to do anything, or the fact that that the bureaucracies and these things they're inefficient, people screw up, and look, you weren't there.
It's
to
a
protect you,
bureaucracy,
so what good
and
is
it takes place all the time.
Yeah.
However, as I was going to say earlier, the president, the vice president, his entire cabinet are human beings. These people are capable of jealousy, they're capable of greed, they're capable of all kinds of things.
Yeah.
And just because they're in power doesn't make them beyond this. It doesn't make them beyond murder. You know, I do.
Well, I mean, I agree that anybody is capable of doing terrible things. I just don't buy that the idea that you would, have this
Well, you've heard of the
mission
PNAC.
to kill people, in towers in New York.
You've heard of the project.
Okay, let's go to war. For what? Why?
Why? There are a couple of reasons. You'll read in Dr. Griffin's book, he has a chapter called Possible Motives of the Bush Administration.
Yeah.
And he goes through a lot of things. To me, it's very easy to just say the reasoning was money, it was power, hegemony, the logistical placement of bases in that region for future use. Iran, China, God forbid something happens with China. And look at Iraq. We're now building this massive embassy the size of the Vatican that's being built secretly I think across from one of Saddam's old palaces. So obviously we're there for the long haul.
It's not in the green zone?
It's somewhere near it, I believe.
It'll be heavily fortified. Yeah, I know there's supposedly 1,800 or 1,900 people working there. That's what I heard a couple years ago.
It helps me to look at the world as a chessboard.
Okay.
The grand chessboard, I don't know if you've ever heard that phrase. Zbigniew Brzezinski wrote a book in 1997 called The Grand Chessboard. He was National Security Advisor to Carter. I think he's on the Council of Foreign Relations. He wrote this book that essentially mapped out what we're exactly doing now. The need to take over this region because of the resources in that area.
Yeah.
Our oil is under their sand. How dare they?
Well, I don't think that's
But look what we're doing
so
with Venezuela.
far-fetched. Of course, if some obscure country that
Have you
where
heard
we
of,
have no strategic interest, you could understand we're not going to, go to war there.
Have you heard of the Iranian oil bourse that's supposed to be taking
bourse?
place? Bourse, B-O-U-R-S-E. They're going to start trading. Iran is going to start trading oil in euros rather than the dollar. And the media is not telling you about that, because what that'll do is it will hurt the dollar more so. The dollar, I don't know if you noticed, is starting to slide.
I had heard.
And it has nothing to do with nuclear weapons, because Brazil is now a nuclear power. Israel has 300.
I don't know if you want to that was close at 9. I just wanted to let you
Oh,
know.
okay.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry.
Right.
That's interesting. What time is it?
Kind of 9 to 5 town. You could be in the city or something, and the place be able to 1 or 2 in the morning. I think it's probably afternoon.
Yeah, it's 10 after 9.
Yeah.
The Iranian oil bourse. There's no nuclear weapons in Iran.
Spell that for me, V.
Iran oil bourse. B-O-U-R-S-E.
Okay.
It's supposed to be taking place, I think, this week.
In euros, right?
Right. They're going to start trading oil. They're going from petrodollars to petroeuros, and that will hurt the dollar. But the nuclear threat, the U.S. Intelligence Review in July 2005 said they're 5 to 10 years away from having a nuclear weapon.
Yeah, that's one estimate you get. And
Hans Blix
well,
came forward.
They could have it in a year. And who do you believe? It seems like they tug of war.
Well, Hans Blix came forward, the guy who said there were no weapons in Iraq.
Well,
so Iran is 5 years away from having a weapon.
You have to. That's another thing that Miniature kind of looks into what reads between the lines with Hans. Not reading between the lines with Hans Blix, but people can sometimes take things out of context and say, look, all these people tell you that there's no weapons there, but that Hans Blix really doesn't say that. But I think he basically was saying, let's keep looking, let's not go to war.
Oh, absolutely.
But he didn't say, I mean, if he's saying let's keep looking, is that a guy that says, hey, there's nothing here, so why are we looking? This is
Well, he did testify before that commission, whatever the hell that commission was, stating that there were no weapons of mass destruction.
He said that.
Right. I believe that's what he said. We didn't find any weapon. I don't know the exact one.
Yeah. See, this is probably part of the problem with all of us being human. We kind of tend to want to, like you say, cherry pick people's arguments to bolster our own world views.
Well, that's two different sources I just gave you: the U.S. Intelligence Review and Hans Blix.
Yeah.
So again, it has more to do, I believe, with the dollar, the force, than it does with nuclear weapons. Israel has 300, it was released yesterday, Israel has 300 atomic warheads. And they're not part of the treaty that allows you to have these things. Yep. Why aren't we looking at them? Because obviously Israel is our friend.
Yep. Like democracy in the Middle East, they claim. Well, of course you have Turkey. You have Turkey, which is now our friend, our good buddy, who's actually... for years we were at bases there when we were fighting the Cold War.
They came out today that said an Iranian strike, a military strike against Iran would be disastrous. They said that today.
Yeah. It's not something I don't think too many people embrace. I mean, you know, I can be hawkish for that now. I hope to God they can come to, you know, a diplomatic solution. If you get enough people, you know, Russians, Chinese, everybody telling Iran, look, we want to help you. Get rid of this stuff. This is going to be a problem. If they're cut off completely, that could happen.
Well,
I think they'll say, look, okay.
If they give them sanctions, what they're going to do is they're going to cut off the oil, which will hurt us tremendously. Granted, we get a lot of our oil from South Africa, or South America.
There's about 30 countries we get it
We get it from Canada, Venezuela, all kinds of places.
Right.
But if they shut off their oil supply, they're the fourth largest exporter of oil, I think.
I've heard that too. Yeah.
Back to 9/11, there's one thing I want you to look up.
All right.
Transportation Secretary Norman Mineta.
Okay.
He testified before the 9/11 Commission that he arrived at the Presidential Emergency Operations Center, which is the bunker underneath the White House.
Is this also Richard Clark's book?
I think he did mention it.
But it's in his testimony.
It's in his testimony. I have the transcript.
Yeah, I can get that. All that stuff's available online.
Yeah. He said that he got to the PEOC by 9:20, and Dick Cheney was already there giving orders. And before the Pentagon was hit at 9:37, according to Norman Mineta, there was a young man coming into the room saying the plane is 50 miles out, the plane is 30 miles out, the plane is 10 miles out, the orders still stand. And according to Mineta...
And what was the order?
Well, we don't know. But according to Mineta, Cheney whipped his head around and said, of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary?
Yeah.
But the 9/11 report said that Cheney didn't get to the PEOC by 9:58.
Yeah.
Now, where did they get that information, and why did they completely omit Norman Mineta's testimony from the 9/11 report?
They did.
Yeah. They removed the video on the website.
They say Cheney got there 9:58. That's what the official.
They say he got
like
not 9:20. He was, according to the best accounts on cooperative research, he got there by 9:10, and I think that was in Richard Clark's book. Remember, Cheney was whisked away by the Secret Service. They hurried him out of the room to get him down to the bunker, and yet they let Bush sit in a highly publicized location for several minutes while this was taking place. Why did they do that? Why? I mean, people focus on Bush's reaction that day. I focus on the Secret Service's reaction that day. Their job is to protect the president, and yet they said that they didn't feel it was important enough to run him out of the room. They didn't run him, they didn't crawl him, they didn't carry him. They let him stay there in a highly publicized location. Why?
Okay. Good question. I mean, was it something that was on TV at the time?
He was on TV reading about a goat.
Later, yeah, right.
I think Moore covered it in his film. The famous 7 minutes.
Yeah,
Where, okay, look at it from this point of view. Andrew Card supposedly whispered in Bush's ear that America is under attack.
mm-hmm.
And then, if America is under attack and the President of the United States, doesn't he automatically become a target if America is under attack? He's the leader of the country. You'd think that he would become a target, and you would think that the Secret Service would want to protect him, and they did nothing. And that...
well, maybe, I don't know what went on. There was some discussion about...
Why did they rush
Cheney
around?
You away. Well, and how did they... Well, these attacks were occurring at the Pentagon.
Mm-hmm.
Did they know that there was another plane headed... From what
Well,
you're saying with
according to Mineta, they were
but,
watching it come into the Pentagon. About the Pentagon, people like to focus on what hit the Pentagon.
Well, in other words, they were in the underground bunker, and the plane, they saw it coming toward
towards Washington. I think
you're not talking about the one that was.
No, not 93.
Went down in the
No, Flight 93 is another controversial subject, but back to the Pentagon.
Yeah.
The Pentagon sits in the most defended airspace in the world. It's the most defended building in the world. And yet, 34 minutes after the second tower was hit, a plane managed to get into that airspace and hit that building. 34 minutes?
Yeah.
Think about that.
Yeah, I know. See, that's unsettling to me. And we may disagree as to why that is, but it's not comforting either way.
Well, but again, they botched the timelines and the 9/11 report.
Those things.
How is that possible?
Knowing what I know about people's recollections about time, I think it's just fraught with.
Well, but Norman Mineta says he gets there at 9:20, but there are other accounts.
It's the specificity that he's, him saying, we were.
Mm-hmm.
That seems pretty compelling to me.
Yeah. Pretty compelling that it was omitted. Why?
Yeah.
And they changed the time. And the staffers who worked on that part of the
let me ask you this. In other words, this had to be something to ask these people that put this report together. Did they talk to many different people who had different, times, and so they thought, well, look, we can't get a consensus here, or we do have 3 people that say it was this time. Everybody else is all over the map.
I think Richard Clark said it was sometime after 9. Norman Mineta said he got there at 9:20 and Cheney was already there. All the media accounts on cooperativeresearch.org say by 9:10. So it's interesting. It's scary, it's interesting, and I wanted these questions answered.
Yeah, I think we all would like answers, and
it's not our job to find answers to these questions. It's our job to ask the questions, and it's our job to hold them to account and make them answer them.
Yeah.
The government works for people.
Yeah. So you're saying, say that again. It's not our job to answer the questions.
It's our job to get them to answer the questions.
Yeah. Government officials.
Right. If the government has nothing to hide, why do they hide everything?
Unless they just, we're human beings, and, we could get robbed when we leave here tonight, and different people might have seen us and said, well, it kind of happened so quickly. I think the guy was like, I don't know, medium height. And they'll say, well, gosh, he was a tall guy, and, somebody will, of course, say, oh, he's like my mother. Oh, he must have been a Hispanic, That's the kind of prejudice. They're saying, oh, I think they were black.
The 9/11 Commission's mandate was to give a full and complete accounting of the attacks of September 11th.
Mm-hmm.
That was their mandate. That's what they were told to do. They were given the power to subpoena, which they hardly used, I think. Why does the president get to decide that he's not going to testify publicly, he's not going to testify under oath, and he's not going to testify without Dick Cheney at his side?
Yeah, that's...
While Clinton, even though I think he's a scumbag, He testified and even allowed a recording, whereas the people in the White House, they were only allowed to take notes.
Was it ever answered why that was a secret, behind
You tell
closed
me.
door interview?
You tell me. I have no idea.
I don't recall.
But see, when you start taking all of these coincidences,
Yeah.
they start to add up, and they start to say that what we were told about 9/11 was not the truth. And it starts to point more. See, the things that were omitted from the 9/11 Commission point towards guilt towards the administration. The things that were omitted point towards the administration. Why is that? But that's what I want them to answer. Why is that, Mr. Bush?
When you don't get answers, then you start to suspect.
Right, exactly.
We're all
And this has been almost 5 years now, and we're still asking these questions, which they refuse to answer. Kyle Hentz, I believe, the co-founder of 9/11 Citizens Watch, confronted Lee Hamilton about the Pakistani connection.
Yeah.
And Lee Hamilton's like, whatever. I don't want to, he didn't want to answer. He gave it to somebody else to answer.
But, here's what, playing devil's advocate here.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me just say this real fast. Thomas Keane was confronted last month.
Was he?
Yeah.
Okay.
And he was confronted about that $100,000 wire transfer.
Okay.
And he said that he's never heard of it. Well, as it turns out, the Jersey Girls wrote a list of questions that they submitted to the commission, by the way, hardly any of which were answered. And on one of those questions covered the $100,000 wire transfer.
Yeah.
And yet Thomas Keane never heard of it.
Yeah. And here's, just devil's advocate here. I find that, and this sort of, I think, with Kurt Weldon and others, saying, hey, what about Naval Danger? You left this completely out of report.
There you go. There's another example.
I'm wondering, I think you could find people all day long, every day, will say, hey, you didn't answer this question enough to satisfy me, and you left this other part out. Can you really include everything?
But they didn't.
Huh?
They didn't, and as I said, it was their mandate to do so. So what are they covering up? Who are they protecting? The purpose of a cover-up is obviously the protection of something or someone. Why are they doing it? I mean, the people who have benefited most from 9/11 are the Bush administration. If you look at the how have they benefited? They pushed forth all of their policies stating 9/11, 9/11, 9/11. How many times have we heard that phrase from them? 9/11, 9/11.
But how they benefited?
Well, they did everything they wanted to do with it. Their agenda was to go to war. They got to go to war. And now they're making it difficult for whistleblowers to come forward. They're trying to take away their pensions. I guess. They're trying to take away their pensions from whistleblowers, people who come forward. Is that right? No.
I don't know. I mean, I know that if you're a whistleblower,
you're putting yourself at risk.
Like Schaefer.
Yeah, you're putting yourself at risk. But now they're trying to...
Look, let's put this behind us. Let's not get to the absolute truth of this. It's going to embarrass me, so I don't want to talk about it. I'm not going to... When people call me up, I'm not going to tell a reporter, oh yeah, he's telling the truth. Because if you align yourself with Schaefer, then you too will be ostracized or persecuted or whatever. That's human nature too, unfortunately, I guess.
I wanted to say thank you for the opportunity to do this.
We'll talk more.
Okay.
Yeah, well, we're there to tell stories.
If you have questions, I'll do my best to answer them. If you need information, I'll be more than happy to send it to you.
Yeah, let me, like you said, I think you recommended that I, in fact, read Griffin's book, right?
Right, Griffin's book.
Vanity Fair article.
The Vanity Fair article. And remember those quotes. No less than 10 American names that you recognize were involved in the attacks.
Yeah, these were U.S. officials that we would know.
Yeah, well, Dennis Hastert. Yeah, again, Dennis Hastert is the only name that we will yet
Yeah, I wonder why we can't get the other one.
That's a good question. Anyway.